the sound of goodbye. The dawn slid over the rooftops of the small monastery. Amid the whisper of the wind and the song of cicadas, a young monk named Ren sat by the pond. The water was still, so still that the reflection of the sky looked like a mirror. He had loved once before arriving there. He had felt the warmth of a voice, the promise of a forever that could not withstand the passage of time. And though the days passed in silence, he still carried inside him the echo of a name he could not speak without trembling. The master approached quietly, as if floating above the ground. He sat beside him and gazed at the young man's reflection in the water. "Why do you stare so much at what moves only with the wind?" he asked. Ren was silent for a moment. "Because there, master, I still see what I was when I loved." The elder smiled, with tenderness and compassion. "Then, when the reflection breaks, will you cease to be yourself?" The young man lowered his gaze. He did not answer. The master picked up a small stone and threw it into the pond. The ripples spread slowly until the reflection vanished. "The water does not suffer for the reflection it loses," the master said. "It simply returns to what it always was. Stillness." Ren closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt no pain, only a deep silence, beginning to heal. The garden of absences. That night, the wind blew with the softness of an ancient sigh. Ren could not sleep. The monastery's silence was so vast that every thought felt like thunder within his chest. He stepped into the garden slowly, almost afraid of waking the sleeping flowers. The scent of jasmine wrapped around him like a memory unwilling to fade. He remembered his days of love, walks in the rain, laughter for no reason, hands seeking comfort in other hands. All that once seemed eternal was now only an echo, fading with the breeze. He sat in front of a cherry tree. Its branches swayed gently, and a few leaves fell slowly, as if the tree itself knew how to say goodbye. "This is how love leaves," Ren thought. Quietly, with the same delicacy the wind uses to pluck a ripe leaf, the master appeared again, as if the night itself had brought him. He said nothing. He simply sat beside the young man and gazed at the tree. "You know, Ren," he finally said, "some absences bloom, just like this cherry tree. Not because they hurt less, but because they teach more." Ren looked at him silently. "And what can absences teach us, master?" The elder closed his eyes for a moment. "They teach us to love without possessing, to remember without clinging, to look without expecting. Love does not disappear, my son. It only changes form. Sometimes it becomes gratitude, other times wisdom, and sometimes simply silence." Ren felt a tear slide down his face, but it was different from before. It was not bitter. It was a calm tear, as if acceptance itself lived within it. The master continued, "When we love with attachment, we want the other to stay. But when we love with awareness, we understand that all that comes also has the right to leave. And that is not loss, Ren. It is liberation." The young man looked at the garden. Every fallen leaf seemed like a small goodbye. Yet the tree stood firm, serene, waiting for spring without fear. Ren took a deep breath. For the first time, he understood that his pain was not an enemy, but a teacher guiding him toward a clearer version of himself. Love had not abandoned him. It had simply changed form, and now it was called silence. The echo of silence. The days passed with the calm of a river in no rush. Ren began to speak less and listen more. He no longer sought answers in the temple's books or in the master's words. He found them in the sound of the wind brushing the leaves, in the distant song of birds, in the murmur of water spilling over stones. Each sunrise became an invisible lesson. He learned that silence was not emptiness. It was formless fullness. and within it, he could hear the voice of what he once called love, now transformed into understanding. One afternoon, as he swept the stone path leading to the altar, Ren paused. The dust lifted by his broom formed a small golden cloud in the sunlight. And in that moment, he remembered his farewell. The time he didn't know how to say, "I will leave in silence," and chose instead the noise of words, the drama of goodbye. "I spoke when I should have remained quiet," he murmured. "I tried to explain what only time could heal." The master, watching from afar, approached slowly. His voice, like the flow of a gentle stream, broke the air softly. "Silence, Ren, is not cowardice. It is the purest form of respect for what once was. When one leaves in silence, one does not flee. They simply make space for the soul to breathe." The young man lifted his gaze. "So leaving in silence can also be an act of love?" The elder smiled. "It is the highest form of love, because it seeks not to convince, to hold, or to prove. It simply honors what was lived, gives thanks, and moves on." The wind blew stronger, and a few dried flowers fell from the tree, dancing in the air like small memories finally finding rest. Ren closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time, his heart felt light. He understood that to love was not to promise to stay, but to learn to leave while still giving thanks. That night, he wrote a few words in his meditation journal. "Silence is not absence. It is the voice of the soul when it has learned to accept." Then he extinguished the oil lamp and let the darkness embrace him gently. His heart was still, like water after the storm. The art of letting go. One morning, the master asked Ren to accompany him into the forest. The sun had barely touched the earth, and dew still rested on the leaves like tiny mirrors. They walked in silence for a long while, until they reached a clearing where the river carved its way through the stones. "Look at the water," the master said. "It doesn't cling to the rocks that try to stop it. It flows around them, caresses them, and continues on its way." Ren watched the river move. The sound was hypnotic, a melody that seemed to speak directly to his soul. "Should the heart be like this?" he asked. "Let things flow and not resist?" The master nodded with a gentle smile. "True love doesn't bind, Ren. When you truly love, you don't seek to possess, only to understand. And when the time comes to let go, you do it with gratitude, not with pain." Ren knelt by the water and dropped a dry leaf. The current carried it gently, taking it away until it disappeared among the brush. "It didn't fight to stay," the young man whispered. "No," the master replied, "because it understood that its journey doesn't end by leaving, but by continuing. The same is true of the people we love. They don't leave entirely. They simply follow another path." The wind blew, scattering a shower of petals around them. Ren watched them rise and realized that letting go was not forgetting. Letting go was no longer suffering for something that had already been perfect in its time. The master picked up a branch and drew a circle in the dirt. "Love and detachment," he said, "are not opposites. They are parts of the same circle. To love without letting go is a prison. To let go without love is emptiness. But when the two meet, peace is born." Ren held these words in his heart like one protects a small flame from the wind. As they returned to the monastery, he realized that silence no longer felt heavy. Now it felt like a companion, a way to walk lightly. That night, before sleeping, he wrote in his journal, "Letting go is not losing. It is opening your hands so life can continue its dance." He closed the journal and extinguished the lamp. In the whisper of the wind, he thought he heard the voice of his former love, not as a wound, but as a blessing inviting him forward. The Temple of Memory. One gray afternoon, as the sun hid behind slow-moving clouds, Ren decided to visit the old pavilion at the far end of the monastery. It was a place few frequented, filled with dust and ancient statues, where monks once meditated on the past. The air smelled of aged wood and extinguished incense. Ren lit an oil lamp and sat on the floor. From the pocket of his robe, he took out a small red ribbon, the last memory of the love he once had. He gazed at it for a long time, and for a moment, it felt as if all the silence in the world held its breath. "Why do you linger here?" he whispered, almost trembling. But he wasn't referring to the ribbon. He meant the shadow of that love still living in his heart. The master, who had followed quietly without being seen, approached slowly. He placed a hand on Ren's shoulder and said, "Not everything you hold belongs to you forever. Some things must return to the path from which they came." Ren lifted his gaze. "And if I let it go, will I forget who I was?" The master shook his head gently. "Who you were is never erased, Ren. It is only purified when you release it. Love that hurts becomes a burden. Love that is grateful becomes a lesson." The young man closed his eyes. He remembered the laughter, the glances, the promises, the farewells. Everything passed through his mind like leaves carried by the wind of time. And then he understood he did not need to forget. He needed to transform. He took the ribbon in his hands and placed it on the altar. "Thank you," he whispered, "for all that I was with you, and for all that I learned when I watched you go." Then he extinguished the lamp and left the pavilion. Night had fully fallen, but Ren felt no darkness, only inner clarity. The master walked beside him without speaking. Only when they reached the garden did he speak in a calm voice. "Today you did what many fear. You did not run from memory, but faced it until it no longer hurt. That is the true path of silence." Ren took a deep breath. The air was fresh, as if the world had just been reborn. And in his chest, where there had once been emptiness, now dwelled a profound peace, a stillness that asked for nothing more. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Love does not die when it ends. It dies when we fail to learn from it. I chose to learn." And with those words, he closed the heaviest chapter of his heart. The love that never leaves. Over the weeks, Ren became a calmer man. His gaze had changed. He no longer sought, he simply observed. He no longer expected life to hand him answers. He learned to hear the ones that arose from his own silence. One morning, while tending the monastery's garden, a white butterfly landed on his hand. Its wings trembled with the delicacy of a thought. Ren watched in wonder. In that moment, he understood that beauty never tries to stay. It simply arrives, touches, and continues its flight. The master, hidden in the shade of a plum tree, watched him with a faint smile. "What do you see in that butterfly, Ren?" he asked. "I see who I was," the young man replied. "Someone who tried to hold on to what he could only observe." The master nodded. "Love was never meant to be possessed. It is like the air, invisible yet indispensable. When you try to trap it, it stops being love and becomes desire. When you let it flow, it turns you into freedom." Ren looked up at the sky, where the butterfly drifted away in the sunlight. He felt something open inside his chest, like a flower that had waited a long time to bloom. "So," he said, "love doesn't leave when someone departs. It just changes place, right?" The master smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes it lives in a person, and other times, in the silence they leave behind. But it always remains, because true love doesn't depend on presence. It depends on awareness." Ren stood still, letting the wind play with his robe. He felt that everything he had lost was, in truth, just another way life had loved him. Heartbreak, he realized, was also a doorway, the doorway back to himself. That night, during meditation, he sensed he was no longer alone. It wasn't the presence of another. It was his own whole without gaps. And for the first time in a long while, he smiled with his heart. He picked up his journal and wrote calmly, "The love that leaves with a person is only a reflection. The love that remains in the soul is the true love. That love never says goodbye." When he closed the journal, a wave of gratitude washed over him. He understood that leaving in silence did not mean disappearing, but returning to the essence, to that space where love no longer hurts, but simply is. Return to silence. Winter arrived in the valley with its cloak of calm. The mountains slept beneath a thick mist, and the days seemed slower, as if time itself were meditating. Every morning, Ren walked along the leaf-covered paths, feeling that each step brought him closer to himself. The monastery was silent. Only the creak of wood expanding in the cold, the distant caw of a lone crow, and the gentle breath of the wind could be heard. It was in this silence, so dense, so pure, that Ren began to understand the true nature of peace. One afternoon, while meditating by the pond, the same one where it had all begun, he remembered his days of love. But this time, there was no nostalgia, no pain. Images came and went like clouds driven by the wind. The beloved face no longer hurt. It was part of an inner landscape where everything had its place, without judgment or desire. The master approached and sat beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply watched the mountain's reflection in the still water. Finally, the elder spoke. "Ren, what do you hear when everything seems silent?" The young man took a deep breath and answered calmly, "I hear the pulse of my heart, and I feel it does not beat alone. It is as if the entire world breathes with me." The master nodded. "That is true love, not the kind that seeks to possess or hold, but the kind that recognizes itself in everything. The love that beats in the water, in the stones, in the wind, and in the chest of those we once loved." Ren lowered his gaze. "So, there is no real farewell, master?" The elder smiled gently. "No, there is only transformation. The love that seems to end does not die. It dissolves into existence, returns to the source, becoming part of the whole. That is why leaving in silence is not abandoning love, but allowing it to return to its natural state. Stillness." The wind stirred the pond, forming tiny ripples that expanded slowly. Ren realized those ripples were like human affection. They emerge from contact, spread, transform, and eventually return to the water from which they came. He closed his eyes. In his mind, he heard the voice of his former love, not as a memory, but as a soft vibration that whispered, "Thank you for letting me go without breaking yourself." Tears fell, but they were not of sorrow. They were pure tears of gratitude and freedom. "Master," Ren whispered, "I understand now that silence is not absence, but formless presence, and that to love in silence is to keep loving, without asking, without expecting, without holding." The elder placed a hand on his shoulder. When the heart reaches this understanding, it stops searching outside. It realizes that the love it lost was, in truth, the love that had been sleeping within itself all along. Ren bowed deeply. He no longer felt the weight of the past, only the lightness of one who has understood that all experiences, the joy, the loss, the desire, the farewell, are part of the same lesson. Learning to love without fear and letting go without pain. That night, back in his room, he lit a candle by the window. The flame danced gently, reflecting its light on the paper where he wrote his final meditation of the day. "I will leave in silence, not because there is no love, but because love no longer needs to be named. Silence is my way of continuing to love, without chains, without demands, without end. Then he blew out the candle. The flame went out, but the warmth lingered for a moment, like a farewell that does not hurt, but illuminates. Ren smiled in the darkness. Love had not gone. It had simply learned to stay in another way. The peace of goodbye. Morning arrived silently, bathing the monastery in a golden glow that seemed to caress every stone and leaf. Ren walked to the edge of the garden, where the wind played with fallen petals. He paused, took a deep breath, and for the first time, felt no hurry. The master watched him from the shade of a tree. "Today is a good day to leave," he said softly. Ren did not answer immediately. His heart was calm, filled with a clarity that once seemed unreachable. There was no fear or longing, only a deep acceptance of what had been, what is, and what could still be. "I will leave in silence," Ren whispered, "not to forget, nor to run away, but to let all that has passed follow its course, like a river that never stops." The master nodded and walked away without haste, allowing the young man to find himself with each step. Ren walked the monastery paths one last time. Every flower, every stone, every fallen leaf seemed to bow to him, reminding him that life is a constant flow and that goodbyes are not endings, but transformations. At the edge of the forest, the wind brushed his face and carried a familiar scent. The mix of damp earth, incense, and the memory of a love that no longer needed a name. Ren smiled. The pain had given way to gratitude. He paused, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. He felt his heart beating in harmony with everything around him. The air, the water, the earth, the sky. Love, he realized, had never left. It had only taken the perfect shape of silence. With soft steps, he entered the forest, letting the sounds of nature embrace him. Every leaf that crunched beneath his feet reminded him that the path continued, and that peace was not in holding on, but in letting go. Before disappearing among the trees, Ren wrote his final words in his meditation journal. "I will leave in silence, but I will keep loving in every breath, in every falling leaf, in every wave that touches the shore. To love and let go is the only way to live in peace." The monastery remained calm. The wind continued its dance, the river sang on, and the mountains stayed in their eternal stillness. Everything followed its course. Everything was in its place. And Ren finally understood that leaving in silence was not an act of loss, but the purest way to return home, to his own soul, full of love, gratitude, and peace.